Welcome back to Alberta Primetime. Well, what is the likelihood of a letter from Saskatchewan Premier Brad Wall swaying American President Barack Obama into action on Keystone? Joining us is Russell Dratwa. He is Senior Investment Advisor with Canaccord Wealth Management. In Calgary, Shafik Hirani, Director with Investors Group Calgary, and Jameson Berkow is BNN's Western Bureau Chief. Welcome back to Alberta Primetime, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, let's start. I mean, last week, Premier Brad Wall of Saskatchewan led 10 U.S. governors in sending a letter to the president urging action on approval of the Keystone XL pipeline. What kind of impact is this going to have on the president's decision? Russ, let's start with you.
I'm told purely political posturing, little to none is what I'm told. And you have to remember the Saskatchewan election is in 2015. I think BC's is this year. So a lot of posturing.
What do you feel, Shafik?
Yeah, you know, I think it's actually going to have a little bit of leeway. He was put off the Keystone decision politically to get into the election, and now he's getting a lot of pressure. The only challenging thing is that he's getting a lot of letters. There's memos to the president from CNN. I mean, today was his inauguration, and I really think there's a lot more to come. But it is interesting to see it's coming not just from Saskatchewan, but from 10 states. Noticeably missing from this letter was Nebraska, though, and that's interesting to note.
The other person that's noticeably missing there, Jameson, is Premier Alison Redford. Apparently, she wasn't asked to sign. This was something that was done outside of Alberta. This was done by Premier Saskatchewan and 10 U.S. governors. Should she have signed, or should she sort of maintain her own pressure? What's your take on that?
Well, I think the fact that she's really been the longest standing proponent, at least politically speaking, of this pipeline more or less speaks for itself. I mean, it begs the question, how much should she be doing? How much should she be reminding the United States government of what her position is? I mean, at this point, her position is relatively obvious, and I think that her signature would have just been a formality. There was some reports, I should mention, that she was going to write her own separate letter to D.C., and that's actually not the case. She does have her own plan going. But one thing that I do want to mention, actually, is the timing of Brad Wall's letter, I think, is very interesting, because he obviously was very well known as a proponent of the pipeline, regardless of this rather bombastic letter. But what we saw last week was a high-ranking union representative, Dave Coles at CEP, actually went and gave a speech opposing the pipeline and using very strong language against that. And labor unions have been very in favor of the pipeline generally. So to have this union in particular, which counts including 3,000 Suncor employees, just as an example, among them, to actually come out in favor of them. It's interesting that Brad Wall would then have virtually on the same day counter that kind of reaction with this. Shows the kind of political posturing that's going on in this lead up to the decision, and the kind of drama that's really building that's quite interesting.
Russ?
We have to remember that this is not as big a deal to the Americans as it is to us. I'm told the Americans are going to be one of the largest, if not the largest, oil producer this year with modern technology. So there's no rush from their end. This is pressure on ourselves to get our locked-in oil reserves to the world. Just
curious, though, about Senator John Kerry, as you know, the senator in Massachusetts who's in line for the next Secretary of State. I mean, he's heavily invested into Suncor and Cenovus Energy, but he's got rather a green platform. So if he does, in fact, become Secretary of State under this second Obama administration, what kind of influence will that have, do you suppose, on movement of approval, Shafik?
You know, I think his inauguration is this, not inauguration, but he's set to go to the Senate and for approval this Thursday. This is a big news because he carries a lot of weight as Secretary of State. He's been asked about this, and publicly twice he stated that he's not going to commit either way, but he has been a very vocal figure in terms of carbon capture, storage, carbon emissions. So he's a very green congressman. So I really think that the impact he's going to have on Thursday is going to impact the stocks of both Canada and the Keystone decision itself.
In what way?
Well, if he's not favorable of this decision, then you can see either a decline of the Keystone, which we really don't think there will be, or an extension of the approval. Remember, just to approve Keystone doesn't mean that it's going through. There's still 2 years of building the actual pipeline that we have to go through over the next 2 years. Lots can happen.
Yeah. Oil sands producers have been hit, of course, by a discount on heavy oil that's dropped at times to roughly half the price of West Texas Intermediate. How could no decision on the pipeline affect the price differential, do you suppose, between Alberta crude and West Texas? Jameson?
Well, I mean, pipelines are essentially, I mean, you can come up with all sorts of fancy equations, but essentially pipelines are the main reason that this discount exists in the first place, that the production is going so high, so much higher than anybody ever expected, even just 5 years ago, and now we're at this point where the pipelines simply can't handle the space. And that's the reason for the discount in the first place. So if you get an announcement that one of the major new pipelines that has been seen as really a release valve on the pressure that's been growing in the oil sands isn't going to happen, I think it's fairly safe to say that that discount is only going to widen further, and Canadian oil, which is already the cheapest oil in the world, is just going to get cheaper.
Yeah, I agree. You know, Brenda, really quickly, the disparity between WTI and Brent has just started since 2010. Now there's about a $40 disparity, and Keystone itself brings 500,000 barrels per day into a market that exports about 3 million barrels per day to the States. So that's roughly 20%. So you'll see that disparity continue.
Yeah. Russ, Bank of Montreal is forecasting Alberta GDP growth is going to ease somewhat to 2.7% this year compared to 3.4% last year. Is that all bad news?
Well, growth is great when you look at the global picture, but it's going to be interesting to see. I believe we have the Alberta budget being announced tomorrow. There's going to be some disappointments is what I heard. And again, it all comes back to our oil price. Alberta is boom or bust based on the oil price. And more importantly, people don't realize natural gas is such a major, major catalyst for our economy. And it's been at $4 for the last 4 years. And most of my interviews tell me they need $4 to $6 to actually make a go of it. So with $40 heavy oil prices, under $4 natural gas prices, that's just going to put continued pressure on the revenue for Alberta budgets.
And what does that do to investing advice?
Again, it's just almost, I was talking with one individual the other day, and why is this stock so low? And he goes, it's Alberta oil. And you just kind of sit back and go, it's just because there's such a bottleneck here with our product.
So it's like that for a while then?
It's going to be like that until natural gas gets 4 to 6, so we can get this oil sands to the rest of the world and get a piece of that $112 Brent.
All right, after the break, we find out what our panelists are watching this week, from earnings to oil sands stocks, and controversy on the stock market too. Are the most contentious stocks worth picking or missing altogether? Welcome back to the Monday Money Panel. Time now to look at what our panelists are watching for this week. Shafik, what's on your radar? Big week ahead?
Yeah, it actually is going to be a big week. If you have been following the Bank of Canada, Mark Carney tomorrow is making his Bank of Canada announcement, and they've changed the announcement, so he's bringing the Deputy Minister, basically his predecessor, in. They're going to talk about what's going on with the Canadian economy, how GDP was a little bit lower, and it looks like they might even push further out the extension of the reduction in interest rates, which should be a little bit negative towards the Canadian dollar, and you might see the Canadian dollar drop a little bit. Secondly, a big announcement by Japan. Japan is also trying to get control of their deflationary environment, and they are dumping money into the system. This is very big news for Japan. I know nobody's really watching it, but it's going to be really big in the next couple of weeks.
And Russ, you're looking at the strength in the equity markets. Is that spelling good news or bad news for investors?
We've had a bit of a run since last October and November on the the U.S. fiscal cliff being solved. I love how people have that belief. Simply all they did was introduce the tax, so the debt ceiling is now, and I'm told it's going to hit likely in February. So last time that happened in 2011, markets in 4 weeks dropped about 16%. So I don't know what's going to be different this time with the Americans handling this. And it's simply using their Visa to pay the MasterCard. Now they're trying to negotiate increasing their credit limit. They're not attacking the issue here. So that will continue, unfortunately, to be in the headlines.
Jameson, what are you watching?
I'm watching the oil field services sector at large, I should say. So no individual companies I'm looking at. Really, I want to see this sort of industry-wide trend that's happening right now. We're entering the winter drilling season across North America right now, and the sector's had some really, really tough times over the last 6 months or so, where they've been trying to get up production, but capital budgets from the producers have been cut, so that trickles right down to the oil field services sector, and we see things like Poseidon Concepts having a complete collapse of its stock price. I think it was something like like 65%. It's still down, and they're actually going to be watching what Shafik was talking about a moment ago. They're going to be watching that interest rate announcement probably with a fair amount of interest, just because it's going to impact whether or not they're going to be able to borrow enough to be able to ramp up to the drilling levels that they're going to need to impress investors. So it's going to be a very interesting announcement for the Bank of Canada for a number of sectors, that being one of them that I'm interested in.
Right. Business Insider has come out with the most controversial stocks, including Canadian companies from RIM to Lululemon. Shafik, what makes for a controversial stock? What should we be watching for in this list?
You know, it was a really interesting list, and a lot of these companies, what I was really surprised about was the way they defined controversy wasn't like inappropriate advertising. It wasn't really fraudulent behavior. It's basically volatility. So if you looked at RIM and Lululemon and a lot of and Sears and a bunch of other stocks on there, what you've seen is that you've seen a lot of volatility in the stock themselves. RIM was up, I think, 8% today, and Sears was down, and Lululemon's been all over the place. So when they say controversy in Canada, we're talking about a volatile stock. And
Canadian style.
The Canadian style controversy.
Russ.
You said the word potential. I mean, in the last 18 months, that word should bring a sense of caution to a person, because the only thing that's worked well in the last 18 months are the dividend yield, safe, stable companies. There's been an influx of cash to there, a lot of them quite overpriced perhaps, but we don't anticipate anything changing for 2013. So I tell my clients, as soon as you hear the word potential in a synopsis of a company, approach with caution. It doesn't mean you don't invest, but you better have a very clear understanding of what you're investing, what they have, because that word potential, if there's a miss in the market, in the company, or an underlying commodity, you will be inflicted with severe pain.
Potential Canadian style.
Potential Canadian style.
Okay, BlackBerry 10 is on the horizon. Could it be good ahead for that beleaguered stock? Shafik.
You know, this is one of those things where you buy in the rumor and sell in the actual news. And I think BlackBerry has got a lot of stuff today. They announced an asset purchase sale. I'm a BlackBerry user, and I love the stock, but I really worry about once it's announced what's going to happen with the stock. Remember, there's a big difference between an actual stock and the actual company itself. Company's doing good, the stock can be volatile. I wouldn't be really jumping on the stock right now.
Just to add on to what Shafik was saying very quickly, because that's a very good point, the difference between the stock and the company, and that this BlackBerry 10 really is a Hail Mary for the company itself, and that if we don't see massive success right out of the gate, essentially if they don't blow the doors off this thing, they're going to have to look at some really serious strategic alternatives pretty much the next day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Russ, sectors to avoid in 2013. I mean, there's been some perhaps rather obvious controversy around U.S. arms manufacturers in light of possible gun law changes there, but any others?
I don't think an investor should throw out the entire sector. There's always good companies in every sector. And go back again to make sure you understand what you're buying. If you have a clear understanding, whether it's your field of expertise or the person you're tapping into for your source of information, it's their field of expertise, I don't think you should throw out an entire sector. Right now, the uranium sector is one of the hottest. Who would have thought of that?
Jameson, last couple of seconds to you. Any controversial stocks probably to watch for in 2013?
Probably the entire oil patch. I wish I could narrow down one in particular, but yeah, you want to look for a Canadian-made controversial story. Look for any company based in Calgary.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. Interesting as always. Thanks for joining us. Russell Dratwa is a senior investment advisor with Canaccord Wealth Management. And in Calgary tonight, Shafik Hirani, director with Investors Group Calgary, and Jameson Berkow is BNN's Western Bureau Chief.